Hey guys, it's Karenology. This one is pure chaos. You have to hear how it all went down.
It was 3:17 a.m. when the red and blue lights washed over my bedroom ceiling, flickering like some kind of cheap disco ball for the retired and sleep-deprived. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and pulled aside the curtains to see two squad cars parked crookedly at the end of my driveway. A young officer was already stepping out, one hand on his holster, the other holding a flashlight as big as a Louisville Slugger. All that over a flashlight. Mine. Earlier that night, I had stepped outside in my slippers and flannel robe to ask the third black SUV in a row to move off my property. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I pointed to the private drive, no parking sign that's been bolted to my fence since Clinton was in office. The girl behind the wheel rolled her eyes like I was her high school principal. I told her politely but firmly that this was my driveway, not a valet stand. 10 minutes later, I was apparently reported for threatening behavior. With what exactly? My breath as the officer approached. I opened the door before he could knock. "Sir," he started, eyeing my robe and the flashlight still in my hand. "We received a report that you were acting aggressively toward some young ladies parked here." I squinted at him, the way my father used to look at a crooked nail. "Aggressively?" "Officer, I told someone not to block my access to the garage." "That's not aggressive. That's called being a homeowner." He gave me the kind of smile people use when they're trying not to escalate things. "You mind putting that flashlight down, sir?" I turned it off and placed it gently on the porch railing. There, harmless as a puppy. He nodded and walked back to talk with his partner. Meanwhile, the SUVs remained parked like royalty. One even had its headlights still on, aimed right at my azaleas. The next morning, I found an envelope duct taped to my mailbox. A citation from the Homeowner Association for hostile interaction with guests. Guests? They were strangers. Strangers who took up residence on my concrete without permission. And who, it turns out, were invited by none other than Karen Bronson, new neighbor, current president of the association, and self-appointed queen of Everidge Lane. Karen had moved in 6 months ago. A floral blouse-wearing steamroller, with a voice sweet as molasses and eyes sharp as roofing nails. Within 2 weeks, she'd climbed the ranks of our modest community board like a rat up a drain pipe. By the 3rd month, she had everyone attending meetings like it was church. I skipped one and ended up with a warning about the color of my mailbox. It was beige. Apparently not beige enough. I tried to let it roll off me. I'd lived on this cul-de-sac for 23 years. Built my house with my wife back when we still believed in forever. Every window had her touch. The curtains in the kitchen, the carved bird on the garage post, the rose bush she planted before the chemo started. I wasn't going to let some transplanted tyrant dictate how I lived in the only place that still had her in it, but it didn't stop. 2 days after the citation, I got another notice. My boat, parked beside the garage, was a visual nuisance. I hadn't taken it out in years. But it wasn't hurting anyone. It was part of the scenery, just like the oak tree out front or the wind chime that sang low tunes at dusk. That boat had seen more of the Gulf than most of these people had seen of the inside of a library. Then came the fine for unapproved vegetation. That's what they called my ivy. the same ivy that had been growing peacefully along the fence since '98. It felt like an invasion, slow and methodical. One letter at a time, one false smile at a time. She was tightening the screws. I knew I needed to act, but not rashly. That's not my way. My father always said, never swat a fly with a hammer when a rolled-up newspaper will do. So I waited. I observed. I started documenting things. Pictures, dates, who came and went from Karen's so-called VIP gatherings. And that's when I met Miguel. He was crouched beside my old boat one afternoon, inspecting the rudder like it held the secrets of the universe. I asked what he was doing, and he jumped like he'd been caught stealing hubcaps. Turns out he was the grandson of Luis Santiago, an old friend of mine from the Navy. Louis had passed, and Miguel was living with his mom a few houses down. Quiet kid, smart eyes, hands like a mechanic. He apologized, said he loved boats and didn't mean any harm. I told him he could help me restore it if he wanted. He lit up like a lantern. Over the next few weeks, we worked side by side. Me showing him how to sand and seal, him teaching me how to install a motion-activated camera. We set one up facing the driveway, another hidden near the side fence. I wasn't looking to catch anyone in a scandal. I just wanted proof. Proof that I wasn't the crazy old man Karen was painting me to be. One night, as we reviewed the footage, we saw it. Karen herself, standing in the middle of my driveway, arms folded, giving directions to a guest who parked sideways across both lanes. The next morning, I found a fresh citation. Obstruction of emergency vehicle access. My hands shook as I held it. That's when I knew. This wasn't petty. This was personal. I didn't sleep that night. My body might have been in bed, but my mind was pacing the property like a sentry. I kept thinking about that smug look on her face in the footage. How she didn't just tolerate the disrespect, she orchestrated it. Like it gave her pleasure to poke and prod, until I either exploded or disappeared. That's the thing with people like Karen. They don't stop when you back down. They stop when they're forced to. I spent the next morning digging through my old file cabinet in the garage. It smelled like oil and cedar and the faint ghost of my wife's lilac perfume. Back in the Navy, I kept every document, every instruction, every map. Habit I never broke. I found a folder labeled Property Legal. Inside were the original zoning diagrams, permits, and bingo, the Declaration of Exemption. My house, along with two others on our side of the cul-de-sac, wasn't technically under the jurisdiction of the Homeowner Association. That detail had been grandfathered in years ago, but ignored once folks like Karen took over and started rewriting rules to fit their ambitions. I called Marvin. He was an old friend from my brother's poker nights, a retired attorney who still kept a sharp eye for paperwork and a sharper tongue for injustice. "You're telling me they've been fining you without legal standing?" he asked, his voice like gravel and bourbon. "Send me everything you've got." I scanned the documents and emailed them over, then went back outside to work with Miguel. That afternoon, the boat looked almost alive again. Miguel had polished the chrome so well, I could see my scowl in the reflection. "You think she's going to back down?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, but she's about to have a reason to." The next morning, a loud hiss woke me. I rushed outside barefoot, only to find a tow truck backed into my driveway, hooking chains to the trailer hitch of my boat. I yelled. Miguel came running, and the driver just shrugged. "Work order from the association," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. I shoved a copy of my exemption paperwork into his hands and told him if he didn't unhook, he'd be the one getting cited for trespassing. He grumbled and left, but not before leaving tire marks across my lawn. Later that day, I received a notice taped to my door in all caps bold. "Non-compliance will result in escalated action." They weren't even pretending anymore. Karen wanted me gone. That night, I found James Larkin waiting by my porch. I hadn't seen him much in the last year. He kept to himself, walked with a limp, and always wore his navy cap like armor. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. I nodded. We sat on the porch swing as the cicadas hummed their rusty lullaby. "I used to think Karen was just pushy," he said. "But she's gone too far. I worked the books for the association until last month. Left when she started slipping in her own rules. Thought you should have this." He handed me a flash drive. Inside were PDFs, meeting minutes, financial statements, emails. Some showed backdated citations. Others showed Karen overriding votes or adding decisions never actually approved. And then there was the bombshell. A fabricated agreement with my forged signature, giving permission to use my driveway for guest overflow. That was the document she used to justify the tow truck. Miguel helped me print everything. Marvin reviewed it and nearly laughed. "This woman's not just breaking rules, she's breaking the law." He started drafting a cease and desist and a formal complaint to the city council. I asked if that would be enough. He replied, "It's a start. But sometimes you've got to let the fire get hot enough for others to feel the burn." So we stoked it. Miguel and I compiled the footage, the paperwork, James's documents. We built a tidy timeline of harassment, misuse of authority, and plain old fraud. I burned it all onto 3 discs, one for the council, one for the press, and one for safekeeping. Then we waited. The day before the association's monthly meeting, I got another warning. This time for surveillance equipment visible from the street. Karen was running out of ideas, throwing whatever she could at the wall. It all reeked of desperation, the kind that comes just before a collapse. That night, Miguel stayed late, and we sat by the boat under the porch light, which buzzed like an old neon diner sign. "You ever miss being out there?" he asked, nodding at the boat. I smiled for the first time in days. Every damn day, I told him about the time I outran a squall near Pensacola, how Megs tied down the gear while I wrestled the rudder. "She never blinked, that woman," I said. "Storm came and went, and she just went back to slicing peaches like nothing happened." He laughed, then turned serious. "She'd be proud of you, you know, for not backing down." I looked at him for a moment, seeing more man than boy in his face. "Thanks, kid. Let's make sure she's proud of the ending, too." I didn't know then that the next day would bring more than just words and warnings. It would bring the storm I'd been preparing for, and maybe, just maybe, a break in the clouds. The morning of the meeting arrived heavy with the kind of stillness you feel before a thunderclap. I woke before sunrise, made a pot of coffee strong enough to take paint off a fence, and laid out everything on my dining room table. Documents, photographs, James's flash drive, Miguel's camera footage, and Marvin's letterhead legal brief. It wasn't just paper. It was my shield. Miguel showed up just after 7, still wearing the same hoodie from the night before. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded, but truthfully, my gut was coiled tight. I hadn't spoken in front of a crowd since my wife's memorial, and now I was about to stand in front of 30 neighbors, most of whom had already decided I was the villain. The meeting took place in the clubhouse across from the community pool, the one Karen had revitalized with a donation plaque bearing her name. She stood at the podium already when we arrived, smile wide and voice sugar-coated, welcoming everyone like she was the mayor of Pleasantville. Her blouse looked like a floral explosion, and her pearls shimmered under the cheap fluorescent lights. I took a seat in the back and waited. When the agenda hit item 6, resident conduct and driveway usage, I stood. The room went quiet. Karen blinked once, her smile flickering just a hair. "Yes, Jack?" I stepped to the front, folder in hand, and set it on the table next to the microphone. "Before we go any further," I began, "I'd like to submit a formal complaint regarding misuse of authority, falsification of records, and personal harassment by this association's leadership." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Truth has its own weight. I handed Marvin's letter to the secretary, then clicked the remote in my pocket. Miguel had hooked my phone to the clubhouse screen. Footage played of Karen giving parking instructions in my driveway, of guests arriving, of the tow truck in the early morning. Then I showed copies of the forged agreement with my signature, compared side by side with my actual one. Gasps rippled through the room. Karen tried to interject, but James stood up next. "I can confirm those documents were never approved. In fact, I resigned the day she started issuing citations without vote." He pointed to a slide on the screen. "That line item? It never passed. But it sure shows up in the fines ledger." Someone in the front row, Bob Wilkins, I think, muttered something, and his wife elbowed him hard. Karen looked paler than usual, her posture stiff. "This is an ambush," she said. "A smear campaign." "No," I replied. "This is called accountability." The room stirred. Marvin had taught me that words win hearts, but proof wins battles. And we had both. The vote came after nearly an hour of open discussion. Some tried to deflect, saying it was a misunderstanding. Others, emboldened by the evidence, shared their own grievances. The final tally, 17-6. Karen was removed as president effective immediately. An interim committee would oversee the association while a formal review took place. I didn't gloat. I just gathered my folder and left. Miguel followed me out, grinning like a kid who just aced a math test. "You did it," he said. I shook my head. We did it. The next morning was quiet. No citations on the door, no trucks lurking at the curb. Even the air smelled different, cleaner maybe. I spent the day tending the roses, trimming the ivy that had survived Karen's crusade, and oiling the porch swing until it creaked like it used to. But peace doesn't last long in places where power is only bruised, not broken. 2 days later, I received a letter, not from the association this time, but from Karen herself. Certified mail, signed. In it, she accused me of defamation and property sabotage, and demanded a formal apology or face legal action. She claimed I had damaged her reputation and endangered her family. I laughed out loud reading it. Not because it was funny, but because it was pathetic. The kind of desperation you see when a cornered animal tries to bite with broken teeth. Still, I knew enough not to ignore it. I called Marvin, who told me to sit tight and send him the letter. Empty threats, he said. But let me do some digging. I agreed. Miguel, meanwhile, suggested we get the boat in the water. You need a win that doesn't involve courtrooms, he said. He wasn't wrong. We backed the trailer down the old ramp near the lake's edge at sundown. The boat, christened Maggie's Whisper, slid into the water like she never left. I took the wheel, Miguel at my side, and we cut across the lake under a lavender sky. For the first time in weeks, I felt something settle in my chest. Not victory, peace, until we got back to the dock. There, under the windshield, tucked in a Ziploc bag, was another envelope from the County Code Enforcement Office. A new complaint had been filed against me, anonymous. The letter from Code Enforcement wasn't long, but it was sharp, like a splinter under the fingernail. It claimed my property was in violation of local ordinances, citing unauthorized structural modifications and non-compliant utility connections. I read it 3 times, each pass raising my blood pressure a notch. There were no modifications, no changes, just my house, my boat, and the life I'd been quietly living for over 2 decades. This wasn't about rules. This was revenge. I called the number listed and reached a clerk who sounded no older than Miguel. I asked for specifics, but she just kept repeating, "It's under investigation. You'll receive a formal notice for inspection." I hung up and sat on the porch, staring at the letter. The ink was still warm, but I could already feel the cold edge behind it. I showed it to Marvin, who raised his eyebrows and muttered something under his breath. "They're getting creative," he said. "This came from someone with pull. The association can't issue county-level code enforcement, but someone inside can suggest it." He paused, then added, "She's not done." Miguel and I went through the property again, checking every outlet, every hose, every fixture. Everything was exactly as it had always been. Still, we prepped, fixed loose boards, tightened rails, painted the shed door that hadn't seen a brush since Bush Sr. was president. It wasn't guilt. It was strategy. The inspector showed up 4 days later. Older man, gray hair slicked back, clipboard in hand, government badge swinging from his belt. He was polite, professional, too professional. The way you act when you know eyes are watching. "We've had an anonymous tip," he explained. "Have to follow up." I walked him around, answered questions, showed him utility maps and the original build permits. Miguel trailed us, quiet and alert, like a second set of eyes. The inspector took photos, scribbled notes, and gave no indication of concern. "I don't see anything egregious," he said before leaving. "But you'll get our findings in writing." That night, I got a call from James. "She's talking to people on the county board," he said, "pulling every string she's got." He'd been hearing chatter through an old friend still in the accounting circle. "You stirred up a nest, Jack. Just don't get stung trying to swat every wasp." I told him I'd never been one for running. "You remember what our old captain used to say?" I asked. "Don't fire until you see the whites of their paperwork." A week later the report came. No violations, no fines, no follow-up. Clean. I thought that would be the end of it. But I underestimated the depth of Karen's spite. She went quiet for a while. which was worse than her noise. That kind of silence was a coil tightening. Then the real blow came. A lien filed against my property. Miguel brought the envelope in, jaw tight. Registered mail again, he said. Inside was a claim from the Homeowner Association, stating I owed back dues that had never applied to my home. They were trying to establish retroactive responsibility, using fabricated meeting minutes to prove my inclusion in their domain. It was bold, and it was illegal. Marvin was furious. This isn't just harassment. This is attempted theft. He filed an injunction and began preparing a civil suit. Meanwhile, Miguel compiled everything into a digital case file. We need public eyes, he said. If they see what she's doing, maybe they'll finally care. I wasn't ready to become a headline, but I was tired. Tired of watching someone abuse a system meant to serve. Tired of defending what should never have been under attack. I agreed. Miguel reached out to a local journalist, a woman named Sarah Blake. She was young but sharp, with a reputation for digging up HOA abuses and shining a light on the mold beneath the vinyl siding. She came by with a cameraman, walked the property, asked real questions. I told her about Maggie, the house we built, the life we made. I showed her the roses, the bird carving, the swing, and I showed her the fight. The segment aired 2 nights later. 21 minutes long, aired during the evening news. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years called to say they saw it. Some apologized. Some asked how they could help. But others, the ones still loyal to Karen, started pushing back harder. I found a dead rose bush uprooted and tossed in my driveway. My garbage bins knocked over. Someone left a note on my windshield. Retire somewhere else. Miguel was furious. They're cowards, he said. But cowards fight dirty. Then came the petition. A group of residents, some I thought were friends, filed a formal request to vote on full incorporation of the remaining properties into the Homeowner Association, including mine. If it passed, all past exemptions would be void. Karen, removed from office, but not stripped of influence, was moving her pieces behind the scenes. Marvin called it a scorched earth tactic. If she can't win the game, she's burning the board. I knew what had to be done. I didn't just want to survive anymore. I wanted the truth to bury her ambitions once and for all. I sat at the kitchen table, same one Maggie picked out 30 years ago at a flea market off Route 12. The wood was scuffed, a little warped from years of coffee cups and weathered elbows, but it held firm, like I tried to. The petition was real. The vote was set. In 3 days, my neighbors would decide whether or not to fold my home into the association I never agreed to join. My property, my history, up for grabs. Miguel was pacing like a caged animal. We can't let them win, he said for the 5th time that hour. You exposed them. How are they still trying to pull this off? Because snakes don't die from being seen, I told him. They die when someone chops off the head. I called Marvin. It's time, I said. Let's bring this to court. The next 48 hours were a blur of filings, notarizations, affidavits. Marvin moved like a man with something to prove, and maybe he did. He'd lost a brother to a bad business deal with a crooked board years ago. This isn't just about your driveway anymore, he told me. This is about every damn person who got bullied into silence by people who wrap tyranny in bylaws. Miguel and I made copies of everything, physical and digital. Sarah Blake, the reporter, offered to run a follow-up. We'll cover the vote. Let people see what's really happening in Overreach Lane. On the day of the vote, the community center buzzed with energy. Karen wasn't there. Not officially. But she hovered in the background like a ghost with a clipboard, whispering into ears, shaking hands. It made my stomach turn. I stood in front of the crowd, cleared my throat. Some of you have known me for 20 years. Some of you only know me through rumors and citations. I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for fairness, for respect, for the right to live in the home I built with my own hands without someone else deciding I no longer belong here. James spoke next. Then Sarah. Then Miguel, nervous but powerful. This isn't about old rules or new rules. It's about people. It's about doing what's right. The vote was held. Secret ballot. Final count. 19 against incorporation. 9-4. My exemption stood. I'd won, or so I thought. 2 days later, I got a call from a clerk at the county recorder's office. Mr. Conley, we received a lien release form, supposedly from your attorney, canceling the injunction you filed last week. We need verbal confirmation. I froze. What release form? They faxed it. I read the forged signature, my name, misspelled in shaky script. It had Karen written all over it. Marvin moved fast. We filed a fraud complaint, and within hours the local sheriff was involved. Turns out, Karen had convinced a friend in admin to push the false release. They traced the computer logins. By week's end, Karen Bronson was arrested on charges of document fraud, misuse of association funds, and attempted property theft. Neighbors stared as the cruiser rolled up to her manicured lawn. Her blouse didn't look so crisp in a mugshot. The fallout was swift. James was reinstated to the financial board. The county reviewed the Homeowner Association's operations. The fines issued over the last year were audited. More than half were revoked. My boat stayed put. My roses bloomed. And my driveway? Empty, except for my truck, right where it belonged. Miguel and I finished restoring the boat that week, named her Whisper of Maggie in full. On the first day of summer, we launched her again. Wind in the sails, nothing chasing us but sunlight. As we drifted out past the cypress line, Miguel turned to me and asked, "You think it's really over now?" I looked out over the water, quiet for a while. "I think peace isn't something you find," I said. "It's something you make. And you protect it. Every day." He nodded, and we sat in the stillness. Two men from different generations, bonded by justice, memory, and the shared love of a boat that knew what it meant to weather a storm.